Welcome,
welcome
welcome,
from
Skyman,
and Housie to
to A Walk on the Bright Side.
Strictly Unscripted. And we've got a very special guest today, haven't we, Dave?
Very special guest. We're delighted to have the amazing David A Hughes with us to talk about his latest book. This will probably be a mirror image, but Wall Street's the Nazis and the Crimes of the Deep State.
Amazing book.
So welcome, David.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you guys.
Fantastic. Well, having read the book, I'm absolutely, it's not a long book, but there's so much information packed in there. It's a very easy read and an astonishing read when you find out the content that's in there. I've got quite a few questions, but before I do, I'm going to hand over to Housie, because I think you two maybe have something in common that Housie might want to share.
Well, yes. Firstly, I did my first degree at Oxford University from 73 to 76. Then I did a PhD at UEA, and I noticed from your bio that you actually lectured at UEA. So we've got some interesting crossovers. I'm probably 20 odd years older than you, so I've got a slightly different sort of visage of the kind of higher education world. So I'd like to ask some questions about that during the interview, when if it comes up. But I'd like to start by just referring to your first book, which is called COVID-19, Psychological Operations and the War for Technocracy, Volume 1. So I assume there's a Volume 2 that's kind of on the way. We can talk about that as well. But I just wanted to flag up for the people listening that that you made this amazing book free. You actually put it so that people could actually get the book. They could have the whole book free, and it's published by a really major kind of publisher. Now, having published 16 books myself, I know what it's like kind of negotiating with kind of big publishers. And I would imagine it might have been quite an interesting conversation with you negotiating that with them. And it's fantastic you've done that. And my understanding is that you have foregone royalties. And because you've so sort of generously done that, your book has had hundreds of thousands of readers, which if you hadn't done that, it would probably been the average 5,000 or sort of maybe 10,000 max, which is what a book like that would normally sell. So the fact that you've been so generous with that means that your work has reached hundreds of thousands of people. And I just want to thank you. That's an amazing thing you've done.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank the anonymous donor who provided the funding to make that book open access. So it was published with Palgrave Macmillan, which is a respected academic publisher.
Yeah.
And to make the book open access cost £13,000. And there was an individual out there who was generous enough. I've never met this person. I've never spoken to them. I don't know them. But they were generous enough, having read the manuscript, to think that it was worth making open access. So really, it's all down to them that this was possible. As you say, I mean, on the publisher's website now, it's had 403,000 downloads.
Wow.
And that's just the publisher's website. So more broadly on the internet, probably millions. Whereas without that open access, it probably would have maybe just had a few hundred, few thousand. I mean, when it was first published, it was priced at £110 for a hard copy. I mean, who's going to pay that? Very few people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's made a huge difference, that funding.
Well, that's brilliant. And that person who donated £13,000, what a wonderful thing to do for kind of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't even know what they look like.
Yeah. Wow. Well, whoever it is out there, if you're listening, thank you so much. We all huge, heartfelt thanks. Yeah.
Righty, so
I've got loads of things here, Dave, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So do you want to start?
Okay. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind when I was reading your book is the shock factor. because there are so many shocking facts in this book. Um, uh, I think, 9/11, we got a shock with 9/11. Eventually we worked out what was possibly really going on rather than what the narrative was. And that was a kind of a shock to the system that human beings could do that kind of thing to other human beings. And then, of course, COVID happened. And it's like shock number two. The government are going along with, you know, the globalist agenda and damaging our health and killing people willingly and probably laughing behind our backs at them. And so when I got to your book, it's like, what else is there in the world that could shock me that much? Until I got to the part about IBM. Now, I have an technical background, so I was putting IBM computers into commercial banks in the early days of the very first IBM computer with a 10 megabyte hard drive. So that tells you how long ago that was. And I actually did a course which taught me about punch card machines. But then when I read your book about IBM's involvement, with the Nazis and using their punch card machines, I mean, it's almost kind of shock level back at 9/11 extremes again. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, that goes back to Edwin Black's work on IBM and the Holocaust and the way that these new technologies were used effectively to plan and systematize the Holocaust. It's quite shocking, but IBM was by no means alone. There's so many of these major corporations that worked hand in hand with the Nazis for profit, and it's really quite a dark history. And again, if you fast forward to today, many of the major IT corporations, the big tech corporations that most people, most people have their phones and use their software, etc. Again, when you understand the history and origins of these corporations and their close links to the intelligence agencies and the history of using this kind of information for surveillance and control purposes, it becomes really quite dark and quite disturbing. And that's why I'm trying to get this information out there so that more and more people understand it.
Absolutely. And, I won't have anything to do with, the likes of Mark Zuckerberg, any of his platforms. I won't touch them. But wherever you go in the world, the first thing people say to you is, send me a WhatsApp message. It's like, I'm sorry, no, I don't use platforms that are made by people who are part of the agenda, that are,
Yeah.
puppets for the intelligence services.
Yeah,
Basically.
absolutely. And I mean that's the key to it, really, isn't it? Not using their tech.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the vast majority of society does, and that's something we need to work on changing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can understand some people saying, well, we'll use it for our own needs. But it's like, no, it's like, I wouldn't buy even the best thing in the world. You just wouldn't buy it from somebody who you knew had a dark background and a dark history.
That's
You-
right. And I mean, it can be put to good purposes in principle, but the problem is we know that it's not designed for good purposes. Quite the opposite. It's
Exactly.
designed to create a totalitarian control system in the final analysis.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Housie.
Yeah, well, I was just when you just by the way, there is a slight echo that I'm hearing. I'm assuming that won't. This is strictly unscripted, by the way, folks.
Can you operate with it as it is?
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm
Okay.
just concerned that when we do a playback, it will
No,
might mess
it
things
should
up.
be
It'll
okay.
be great. Okay, that's good. Yeah, when you were talking there, I was just having the thought that if we lived in a sort of fair world in which the sort of mainstream media wanted to wanted to like fairly report what's really happening in the world, the fact that there were huge kind of collaborations between so-called respectable Western kind of corporations and Nazism would be like, it would be huge headline news and it would be all over the mainstream media, and yet there's a kind of deafening silence about these kind of things. And you couldn't ask for a more clear example of how our mainstream media is so incredibly controlled and selective about what it reports and what it doesn't report. Yeah.
absolutely, and academia as well.
Yeah,
This,
yeah,
this kind of thing should be taught in mainstream history because it's incredibly important. And yet, academia maintains a rigorous silence over these kind of topics. Are simply taboo. You know, it won't look at the events of 9/11. It won't look at the crimes and atrocities of the COVID era. It won't look in any real depth at the kind of topics that are in my book. There's a great quote from an author called Charles Hyam in my Wall Street book in chapter 3 towards the end. And he says something along the lines of, just imagine if the American public had known that, for example, Rockefeller's Standard Oil was manufacturing the necessary materials for the Nazis to go to war and maintain that war effort,
yeah,
while not manufacturing them for the United States. That it had taken that decision and that there was no patriotic loyalty whatsoever. And he lists multiple firms, large corporations that did similar. General Motors, for example, and Ford were both manufacturing vehicles for the Nazi war machine, playing both sides, profiting from both sides. And Hyam said, just imagine that the public had known what was going on. It never would have stood for these things, never in a million years.
yeah.
So you can see how important the mainstream media is in controlling that flow of information so that the public doesn't find out. But we're in a similar position today, I think. It's actually quite a precarious position, in my opinion, for the transnational ruling class that are pulling off these operations through the transnational deep state, because more and more people are now starting to get wise to what's going on. And events like 9/11 and COVID leave so much evidence. They're on such a scale that more and more people are starting to see this now. So one of the reasons that I wrote both of these books was to kind of dig deeper into this and show that these kinds of events, these kinds of behaviors by bad actors don't come out of nowhere. There's at least a 100-year history here that we can explore and map. And once you see the bigger picture, it's highly disturbing because you realise that governments are not really acting on behalf of the people, not on issues like this. They're quite happy to collaborate, particularly in the case of COVID, in order to suppress the population. So there's a real kind of transnational class dimension to this, and the fundamental challenge by the ruling class is how does it keep a kind of restive population under control as existing control mechanisms start to break down. And that, I think, is really what we're looking at since 2020. It's a gigantic effort to wrest back control, move us onto a new system, which will be technocracy, control through kind of all digital means. It is a totalitarian control system that they're trying to build, and on a global scale. And it's the scale of it that most people struggle to comprehend, and the fact that it's all kind of invisible. You don't see 5G, you don't see central bank digital currencies, you don't see social credit scoring. It's all, there's a strong kind of invisible element to it all, and so they have to keep running these psyops to keep distracting the public. And it's the latest war in Iran or Ukraine or whatever else. But actually, the fundamental project that is being pushed hard now in the wake of COVID is for global technocracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And David, just very quickly say, what I think is so important about your work is that you kind of present it in a very, very sober way. You're not someone who rants. You're not someone who sort of grandstands. You do like meticulous research. Your writing is meticulously researched and referenced, and that must be one reason why I would imagine that the establishment, let's call them the establishment, must be terrified of people like you, because actually, people like, I know, David Icke or Infowars Alex Jones can be kind of written off as just rhetorical kind of ranters, whereas you can't be written off like that.
No, and it raises serious questions again about the failures of academia, because in many ways what you're describing there simply reflects my academic training.
Yeah.
Academia done well is not about ranting or grandstanding or spectacle. It's about calm, rigorous, thorough analysis of the facts and the evidence.
Yeah.
So in a sense that it simply reflects my training. Now, just imagine that it wasn't just me that had come from the academic world that was taking this approach. Imagine there were hundreds or thousands of people like me from academia who were all willing to deploy their skills and their training in the service of humanity and to actually question these taboo narratives and to look at the obvious evidence around 9/11, for example, and to fulfill academia's civic duty and responsibility.
Here, here.
Unfortunately, academia in the 21st century has failed spectacularly
Yeah.
in this. So I occupy, I think, perhaps a unique space now because I bring the kind of academic rigor, methods, and training to bear to topics that academia won't touch. Meanwhile, you have to turn to the independent media space to find analysis of those topics, but typically the commentators in that space don't have the same kind of academic training. So if you think of it as a Venn diagram, we're kind of in the middle of the two circles, the independent media and the academic background. And I guess, to use a horrible marketing phrase, that's my unique selling point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and absolutely right. And I just want to go back to, this kind of shock factor, because it seems that what's preventing the majority of the public from uh, finding out any kind of truth is that they won't believe that human beings are capable of such acts,
Mm,
because they'll tend to refer to their own value system and morality and think that everybody's the same.
mm,
And I was listening to James Corbett recently, the Corbett Report, who's very clear on saying, look, these people that are behind, this global tyranny, they have no conscience. These people have no conscience. They can do whatever they want, and they don't lose sleep over it. And if you get rid of the people at the top, there's a whole load at the level below that who also have no conscience, that are ready to step into their place. And I think that's one of the concerns, because once you get the first shock, whether it's 9/11, COVID, whether it's learning about the Nazis or IBM, once you get that first shock, then I think it takes you into a different space where you lose trust in the people that you had trusted, and then you can start to uh, to perceive events around the world from different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, Corbett's Descent into Madness series was extremely good. And he draws on the work, for example, of Andrew Lobachevsky back in the 1980s in his book Political Ponerology. And he described what he called a pathocracy as the kind of political regime that we live under. In other words, there's a real kind of psychological pathology behind those in charge. There's a kind of empathy deletion and a psychopathy. And in the highest places, we find people who are willing to commit the most heinous of crimes on the most unimaginable of scales. If you read chapter 6 of my Wall Street book, it's called Intelligence Crime, and it's essentially a catalogue of these types of crimes. It's hard to believe that this is what is going on, and yet it is. And unfortunately, there does seem to be evidence to support the argument that those who are most ruthless, most brutal, least caring about other people in a capitalist society are the ones who are likely to rise to the top. And so the well-known facts about the disproportionate number of psychopaths in corporate boardrooms, for example. So the interesting thing I found about Corbett's series was his argument that the psychopathy is kind of it originates in that kind of higher echelon of power, but it actually filters down and pervades all of society. And we saw this with COVID, with the abominable behaviour of so many people towards those who, for instance, wouldn't wear masks. And these traits can kind of seep into ordinary behaviour,
Yeah.
putting up with kind of inhuman work regimes and dreadful ways of treating other people. And when that starts to become normalized, we have a real problem throughout society. So in a sense, and as Corbett, I think, was arguing, the solution has to rely on society not accepting this kind of behavior, not accepting these kinds of values, not helping to perpetrate it, and to actually to behave better than that. And that really comes to a point very similar to what you were just describing about once you have that kind of moment of realization, it's not just an intellectual moment of realization. It comes with a moral dimension and a moral obligation. And I sometimes quote the Solzhenitsyn line about the line between good and evil that runs through every human heart. And of course, totalitarianism is firmly on the side of evil. And so my opinion is that given that there is now a global attempt underway to manufacture this new form of totalitarianism, it is fundamentally evil. And I faced that, I experienced that very, very strongly in 2020. And I think once you see these things, then you also have an obligation to act and to do something about it and to change your own behaviors, your own attitude, your own approaches to the world, and to begin resisting, begin taking action. This is fundamental to dealing with the problem. We all have that obligation.
Absolutely right. And it reminds me of, I was paragliding for about 10 years, and I flew all around the world. And we're here in the Cotswolds, and we've got a beautiful view out the window, which unfortunately you might see a little reflection in the mirror. I don't know. But there are two great sights here. But when COVID happened, and I suddenly realized, and the penny dropped, and the shock hit me. One of the things with paragliding is that what looks like a good flying day, you can go on the hill, and there's no lift, there's no air. So you sit on the hill for sometimes hours and hours, or even all day. I realized at that point that I can't give this amount of time to this. We have to do something about what's going on, because what's going on is it's inhuman, and most people don't know what's really happening. So you're absolutely right. I felt a deep obligation to do something about it. Going on protests, helping out with the light paper, doing whatever I could, trying to wake people up in the early days, and then being called a nutcase. And so I stopped paragliding because I just couldn't afford the time to sit and wait on a hill doing nothing. There was work to be done, clearly.
Yes, there's a very practical and real dimension to this, and it requires self-discipline, and you exercised it there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all. I was having a conversation about this with a friend recently, and I think my friend was saying, "Well, there's so little I can do, and there's just little old me," and I was saying that every act that everyone does, however big or however small, contributes to the whole, and it's all important. And I think it's really important for people to hear that message, because it's very easy for people to feel very demoralized in the face of the things that you're actually talking about, David. I think it's really important for people to perhaps realize that just the very act of doing something empowers one. One feels empowered by the fact that you're doing it, and it doesn't matter how big or how small it is. You haven't got to be a kind of world famous writer or something. Just some little kind of act that you're doing in your local community, challenging your local council, that will actually have an effect. And if you've got millions of people doing all these little acts all over the world, at some point, there's going to be a sort of tipping point, and we are going to prevail. That's the way I see it, anyway.
Absolutely, and even the baddies recognize this. If you read Zbigniew Brzezinski's 1970 book, The Technotronic Era, there's a small observation in there about the student protests from the 1960s on US campuses. And he makes the observation that levels of reported mental health issues on campus dramatically went down as the protests went up.
How interesting. How interesting.
So you can see that actually taking action and doing something was good for the mental health of these students. And I think there's also a deeper dimension that, in a sense, your actions shouldn't necessarily be linked to the outcome. You shouldn't be too invested in the outcome.
Exactly.
You need to do the right thing for the sake of doing the right thing.
Exactly.
And you need to make sure that your actions are aligned with your values.
Yeah.
And so if you see yourself as a kind and compassionate person who cares about humanity and objects to tyranny, then you need to find a way of doing something regardless of what the outcome is. All you can do is put your best out there into the world, and leave it at that. You know, what others make of it is beyond your control, but you just do what you can do. And I'm in my line of work, and no doubt in yours. You know, I don't know where these podcasts go. I don't know how many people see them. I don't know how many people have a quiet moment of realization, you know, based on something that I may have said, and you know how that kind of triggers a change in them. I have absolutely no idea. You know, it's nice to get positive feedback, but you can't measure the outcome. You can't measure the scale. I don't know how many people have read my work. I've no idea how many people have listened to my interviews. I just keep putting it out there, regardless, because it's the right thing for me to be doing at this point in my life.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, as you mentioned the topic, the Fleming Blitcher interviews were absolutely superb. I watched every single one, and just the way that you structured that in the I think there was a 4 parts, or I think it went to a 4A. I highly recommend anyone that's listening to this now to check out the interviews with Fleming Blitcher, the Danish Illusion podcast, and that will be on your Substack, I believe.
Yeah, and on my website, davidahughes.net. And I'm
Yeah.
very grateful to Fleming for doing that. It's a real deep dive into the book, and you know, to really unpack it, it does require hours and hours, because there's so much information out there. And one of the slight frustrations of doing this work is that most people don't read. I think, you know, they want the kind of entertainment. They just want to listen to a podcast. They want to be able to, you know, listen while they're driving or doing the ironing or whatever. You know, it's all about the convenience. Very few people are willing to actually buy a book like that, sit down with it, and go through the intellectual and emotional labor of reading it. So it has been slightly frustrating to me for a couple of years. I felt that some of the key themes in that book haven't really been unpacked properly. So I'm very grateful to Fleming for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And Housie here reads profusely.
Yeah. Well,
So
academics do tend to do
they tend to, yeah. You can probably tell I'm not an academic. And Housie's never had a smartphone, by the way, never.
Hey, very good.
I used to have one, and then it broke, and I thought, okay, maybe the universe is telling me something. So I got myself a dumb phone,
Oh,
and
what year was that?
that was this year.
Wow. Well, that means that
Confession time.
you now qualify as person number 5 to meet my challenge of have you been able to get rid of your smartphone since 2020?
All
And
right.
I've been asking this now to my audience for, I don't know, a year and a half or something. And you're only the 5th person who's managed it. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Excellent.
Well,
Yeah.
let's get more people doing that.
And I'm feeling so much better for it, because they are addictive. It's like it goes everywhere with you, and the minute you've got a spare moment, you're checking to see if there's anything new on there. And so now I just sit down with a good book, and it's. I mean, I always have read, but I'm reading so much more now that I've got rid of the smartphone. So,
All power to you.
thank you, David.
Well, also, I've never done social media in my life, and I never will. And I'm so happy. And I also gave up watching television in 1992, which is one of the best things I ever did in my life.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. That probably explains why you're here today doing this.
yeah. I just want to pick up. Can I go back to there's a bit of a segue here into what you were saying just now, David. This word outcomes. One of the reasons that I finally got out of the higher education world is just the obsession with bloody learning outcomes. And I'm sorry to swear, but the whole notion of learning outcomes is a complete catastrophe. It means that you are at the outset, you're specifying what the learning outcome should be. Now that is the death knell of free, open-minded learning. And I was so fed up in the job I had, where I was always being told about the learning outcomes and, oh, you have to teach in this certain way because the students need to have these learning outcomes. I just had enough of it. I just couldn't actually do it anymore. I've written a lot about all this, sort of the audit society, the audit culture. I've written a lot about that over the years. But that was a kind of segue into asking you, and this might be something that you're not able to freely speak about, and I'd quite understand that. But personally, having worked in that world for many years, I'm just wondering what happened in 2024 when I don't know whether you resigned or whether you were sacked or you were quietly told that your services weren't required. I'm just wondering about what happened in kind of the academic world in whoever it was at kind of Lincoln University where you were lecturing at, um, yeah, what that whole process was of you no longer working, or whether that was your own free choice, or whether there were tensions and there were pressures put on you. And I understand you might not be able to kind of to speak about this, so yeah, you can say what you want, really. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on the specifics regarding the University of Lincoln, but I can
yeah,
comment on more general trends in the sector
yeah,
and my experience of the profession as a whole. So, I mean, financially, the profession has been put under extreme pressure, really going back to the financial crisis of 2008, which drained a lot of money out of the system. And as the government funding for higher education declined, universities then became more reliant on, for example, research grants from external sources or income from consultancy work. And so the nature and quality of the research became ever more beholden to those particular organisations, be they the major government research agencies like the UKRI or the private foundations like the Wellcome Trust and so on. And that in and of itself creates problems for the nature of research, because obviously big and powerful funders will only be interested in funding certain things, which essentially those things which serve elite agendas. So it means that the academy itself begins to lose a critical edge. The increasing corporatization of the academy, you've also touched on. I mean, the learning outcomes is one small example, but increasingly the kind of business-like character of the profession became ever more evident.
yeah,
Then, yeah, just picking back up on the funding, in 2012, the tuition fees in the UK got put up to just over £9,000, and they haven't really moved since then. And what that means is that they've lost about a third of their value through inflation since then. And then there were major increase in pension costs. The fuel crisis after the Ukraine conflict meant that the costs of running the university estate went up. And essentially, long story short, universities have been put under enormous financial pressure, and most of them now have been making big cutbacks on staff. And most of those cutbacks have fallen in the areas of the arts and humanities. So in 2024, I think about half of universities were making massive cuts, 10% or more of staff very often. And I was offered the opportunity, as were many of my colleagues, to take voluntary redundancy.
right,
And I looked at the situation and I thought about my experience with 9/11. I published a peer-reviewed journal article about academia's failure to ask critical questions about 9/11. And what did I get in response? No proper engagement with that paper. No saying, hey, yeah, that's a really good point, actually. You've provided loads of evidence that the official narrative is a lie. And if it is, that's absolutely scandalous and shocking.
yeah,
None of that. But there were dozens of academics all over the world the day the paper came out, basically tweeting hate at me. It was this real kind of groupthink kind of
right,
psychology. The opposite of how a proper critical thinker should behave.
absolutely right,
I looked at the 4 years that had elapsed since COVID, I thought, where is the academic challenge to all of this terrible stuff that's been going on for the last 4 years? And not only did I not see the challenge, I saw academics lining up in their papers to provide rationales for mandatory vaccination, for more efficient algorithms to help with the censorship and all of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That deeply troubled me. Then on the teaching side, in 2023, AI came along and has generated massive problems in the sector, with large numbers of students using AI to write their essays. Now, I mean, historically, the essay has been, one of the key, especially in the arts and humanities, one of the key modes of assessment to test your ability to express yourself, your critical thinking, your ability to marshal an argument, bring all of that together in an evidence and structured and well-referenced way. It's a major thing. Well, all of a sudden, when students just start using AI, all of that starts going out the window. And I found that the sector as a whole was not responding to it adequately. It was embracing the use of AI in learning and in the classroom and for assessments, rather than asking any critical questions about it. So even the teaching side of things, as well as the research, was starting to get pressured. The financial aspects that I've discussed have meant that across the sector, fewer and fewer staff are being asked to do more and more work, including more and more admin. And so I put the whole thing together, and I just quietly reflected, and I thought, the whole reason that I gave my life to this profession and worked really hard to get where I'd got to was a love of the pursuit of the truth.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
And I arrived at the conclusion, peacefully, that the one place where that isn't possible, ironically, is academia, because of all of these obstacles that stand in the way to getting to the truth. So I realized if I was to actually stay true to myself and to continue along that path, I'd have to give up the career that I worked so hard for and to take my chances in the independent media space, which is what I've done.
Wow.
Well,
I just want to mention that that's like the aftershock, and I felt the aftershock. You get the shock of COVID and what's really going on. And my background is with NLP, so I used to run a neuro-linguistic programming courses, and so I could see the brainwashing that was going on quite clearly. And I thought, well, all the other NLP trainers, master trainers, whoever they are, practitioners, they'll probably notice it as well. And I didn't hear a thing, not a dicky bird from any of them anywhere. So I put a message. I had a big LinkedIn profile at the time. I put a message on LinkedIn to say, hey, all you NLP gurus out there, you know what's going on. Come on, spill the beans. So the next day they closed my LinkedIn account down. But that's like the aftershock, isn't it? Realizing that most of the people haven't had the first shock.
Yeah, and
For whatever reason.
I mean, the professions as a whole, they all failed. They all lined up behind power. Gary Sidley wrote some excellent stuff about the British Psychological Society.
yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I thought that was really valuable what he wrote, because I mean, I've written one volume. Volume 2 will come out soon, hopefully. Hundreds and hundreds of pages providing the evidence that there was a psychological warfare operation waged transnationally against the public.
Yeah.
So what would you expect the psychology profession to have to say about this, and the ethics of everything that's been happening, and the psychological assault against the population? And the answer was that the British Psychological Society had absolutely nothing whatsoever to say about any of this. Didn't see any problem with any of it. And this is true in profession after profession after profession. And so you realise that the professions they've been captured. It's very sad.
They've been captured. There's a very good article in the current Light newspaper. I'm advertising the Light paper, folks, which is about the British Psychological Society, and it's a superb article. I highly recommend people read that. Yeah, yeah. Well, Dave's given me a book. There's a sort of quote here that I was going to kind of read out, but I've got all kinds of other things that I want to say. It's always the same. It's always the same. I wanted to pick up on something you were saying just now, and I was trying to hold it in my memory, but I think it's probably gone there. Yeah, I wanted to say that the last substantial thing you said David, I think needs to go viral. That you're making an extraordinary statement that the world, which I joined when I went to university in 1973, it was a space for free thinking. And when when I did my first degree, I spent 3 years reading outside of all the of all the reading lists. So, like, if we were given a reading list, I was going to go and find literature that was not on the reading list, and I did that for 3 years, and I got a really, really good first class degree. I'm not boasting about that, but I'm making the point that when I sat down to write my finals, I did not regurgitate what we've been taught. I'd gone outside of those bounds, and I was bringing in all kinds of things that we weren't being taught. And so when I went to university, it was a space where you could do that, and it was expected, and you were kind of rewarded for doing it. You're now saying that it's the contrary to that. It's not a place where truth is actually valued, and that's an incredibly important thing for the whole population to know about. For young people thinking about going to university, what are they going to do with their lives? It's just very important that message gets out. That the whole higher education world has completely changed over a space of maybe 30 or 40 years to what it used to be like.
Yeah, and that's a result of the neoliberalisation of the academy. I mean, I'd put some important caveats on that.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great work that does get done in academia. There's a lot of people who are, rigorously going after the truth in their particular subject areas and doing it all right. The point I'm trying to make is that when it gets to the margins, when it gets to topics and issues which fundamentally challenge power, that is when the profession has nothing to say. So the 9/11 case is instructive because when you think about the war on terror and all of the horrors that have followed, and the oppression and the surveillance and the drones and everything else that have come from the war on terror, all of that was premised on the 9/11 official narrative. And it is provable easily beyond any shadow of doubt that narrative is a lie.
Yeah.
There's so much evidence that you can adduce. So therefore, I found it highly dismaying when, for example, attending a research training session in academia, and you're told things like, well, to produce a top quality paper, there are several kind of key criteria. One is, the originality and importance of the research. The second is, the analysis of the evidence. And there was a third, which will come back to me. But the point is, I thought, well, how ironic is that? Let's look at 9/11. Could it be any more important, given everything that's happened?
Yeah,
No, so
absolutely.
the significance, massive tick. Is the evidence there available to analyse? Yep, massive tick. Oh, yeah, and the third was methodological rigour. Do academics have the rigour to bring to bear to analyse that evidence? Yep, tick.
Yeah.
So this issue should be absolute dynamite in the hands of academia.
Yeah.
And instead, what you find is 25 years of silence, essentially. Hardly any academic has really tried to address these issues at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I also wanted to raise something that maybe is a bit controversial. Is it possible for us to be controversial? Maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Give it a shot, Housie. Who knows where it's going to go?
It's just that when I'm sort of reading your things, David, reading your books, listening to you, you're kind of using phrases like the transnational ruling class and the global ruling class, and I've written some of them down, and the can't read my own writing, undeclared class war. Now, from my own kind of background, I come from the sort of political left. I was in the 70s and 80s. I was really into kind of Marxism, Althusser and all that kind of stuff. I was really interested. I read it, and so that's the journey I've been on. And I know now the whole left-right paradigm. That's kind of in camp too, and it's a clown show. It's a distraction, and most of us are now realizing that. But until not long ago, I mean, I actually joined the Labour Party in 2015 because of Jeremy Corbyn. Because I'd always looked up to Jeremy Corbyn, I'd really respected him, and I just I just wanted to make the point that there are a significant number of people in the freedom and truth movement who are not coming from a conservative or from a right or a far right viewpoint. I think there are a substantial number of us who come from who've had a journey from the political left, and I just wondered, based on the sort of language you use, what your journey's been. And of course, you might not want to talk about it, and that'll be fine. So,
No, I don't mind at all.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I would say that I came from the political left as well.
right,
I have written about my disillusionment with
yeah,
the political left, just as
yeah,
various commentators on the right have written about their disillusionment with right-wing commentators in
yeah,
2020. As you say, the left-right distinction isn't really that helpful anymore in an era where liberal democracy is being dismantled. And the terms that you have cited there, I mean, it's essentially the language of classical Marxism.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Now, to me, having studied Marxism in some depth down the years, it is impossible to understand what is taking place in the world at the moment without a grasp of the fundamentals of Marxism.
I agree.
Now,
Yeah,
the big problem that I face in my work is that statement sends up a red flag and puts a lot of people off
yeah,
because they hear the word Marxism and they have been trained and propagandized to run for the hills.
yeah.
And this runs really, really deep. Coming back to academia, is Marxism even taught anymore? I read a fascinating paper, a journal article in 2017, looking at the master's programs in the top 10 US universities in political science. Marxism simply not taught. Um, Very, very interesting. Or there's been kind of all kinds of bastardizations and corruptions of Marxism in the kind of mid to late 20th century, which I don't think Marx and Engels would have recognized themselves. For example, in the Frankfurt School. Where does the Frankfurt School really talk about class conflict? It doesn't. And yet, where you have many commentators today, they'll say, "Oh, Marxism. You're talking about the Frankfurt School. You're talking about so-called cultural Marxism."
Absolutely.
And I'm
Yeah,
like, no, no, no. This isn't Marxism. Not the Marxism that I understand. I'm talking about the fundamentals of class conflict here,
yeah,
and that has been systematically buried and particularly in the United States, the population, you go back to the early Cold War and the Second Red Scare, and everything Marxist was automatically associated with Soviet communism, even though there's a massive gulf between the two.
yeah,
And it's branded as evil, and you mustn't go there. And there's so many cliches and caricatures and stereotypes about Marxism, which people think are true and they think they understand Marxism, and they just don't get it at all because they've never studied it, they've never been taught it. And this is, again, it's by design. This is what you would expect from a capitalist system. That the one branch of social science which is going to challenge the system fundamentally is Marxism. So what do? You bury it, you distort it, you caricature it. And then at the end of the Cold War, there was a lot of kind of Western liberal triumphalism about the end of history. And the conservatives as well were saying, "Oh, well, the Soviet Union is dead, and therefore that's buried the legacy of Marx once and for all." Again, it's all completely misguided when you really understand it. And so I've been quite careful I'm not going to back away from using terms like global class war and
yeah.
class conflict, etc., because they're fundamental. However, you won't find any mention of Marxism in that book, or indeed, or communism, because the terms themselves have now become unhelpful. and they caused more confusion, I think, than they shed light. So ideally, what I'd like to do, if I had kind of 50 days in the week rather than 7, would be to write a book about the fundamentals of classical Marxism, so that people could start to understand it better. But yeah, I do not see how you can possibly make sense of everything that's happened since 2020 without grasping the transnational class dimension.
Yeah. Can I just say, I am absolutely delighted that you said what you said. I agree with every word of it, and it's so important for people in the freedom and truth movement to really hear what you've said, and that Marxism has been used as a sort of cancel culture term, or that people have a knee-jerk reaction to it, and we really need to really distinguish very carefully what we're talking about. And I think you've done it in maybe a 2 or 3 minute. You've done a superb sort of viewpoint on that, and I think this needs to go all over the place, because I think it's so important that people can hear that.
Yeah, I mean, the levels of ignorance around Marxism are really quite shocking. The number of times, for example, I've heard the World Economic Forum described as a Marxist organization because of
Extraordinary.
the
Yeah,
own nothing and be happy
yeah,
slogan.
yeah.
And I just think, of all the organizations in the world, that one is arguably the most devoted to coordinating the interests of transnational capital.
Absolutely.
It couldn't be more opposite to
Yeah,
Marxist,
yeah.
and yet you find commentators casually dismissing it as Marxist. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, no, it's so important what you're saying, and I'm hoping loads of people hear this and could bring much more critical, nuanced thinking to these things. I just want to share one quote, as a very famous quote of Marx, who in the 1880s was hearing reports of what sort of people were actually doing, using his name, and he said famously, "I am not a Marxist," and I think there's something very, very profound in that, actually. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Wow.
Go on, Dave. You say something.
Pass me the book.
Pass you the book. All right. Okay. I've got lots more. Hey, we're either going to have to go on, or we're going to have you back, David, because we barely scratched the surface yet of what we want to do.
I'm fine to go on. I'm not in any hurry.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna read an excerpt here. I'm gonna find a page. Where are we?
Before I forget, while Dave's looking for that, we'd love to hear about your volume 2.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, I mean, you can find most of it already on my website, davidahughes.net, under the Volume 2 tab.
Oh, right. Okay.
There's about 5 chapters worth in various sections and parts that have already been published there.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to need to maybe add one more chapter, an introduction and conclusion, and then do the hard work of bringing it all together as a single volume. These things take a lot of work and a lot of time.
Yeah. Don't I know? Yeah.
But I have been steadily releasing parts of that book for the last couple of years now. So the majority of the key content is already available for anyone who wants to access it. I'm currently just rounding off the chapter called Vaccine Mind Games, about the various techniques of psychological manipulation that were used to maximize vaccine uptake. But there's all kinds in Volume 2. There's a chapter on cult indoctrination. There's a chapter on applied behavioral psychology. And this is my point about how deep the psychological operation goes, because it's going to take me about 800 pages to detail the sheer number of techniques that were used in this psychological warfare against the public. And so when you cast your mind back to 2020 and you think, why did everybody go along with this? Why wasn't there mass resistance straight away to this overt tyranny? Well, the answer is the scale, the ferocity, and the sophistication of the psychological warfare. It was absolutely everywhere. It was meticulous, it was pre-planned, and it was vicious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was extremely vicious, especially when, I would say the majority of the public were already, on the side of mistrusting the government because of everything that had gone before, weapons of mass destruction, etc., were the lies that were brought out and didn't know about. But so it had to be extremely powerful brainwashing to kind of overcome that, to say, that we're lying about everything, but that, hey, here's the plan if you want to survive.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I want to just skip back to IBM because there are a lot of people it's a technical world these days, you know. I would say majority of the population are probably working on some kind of technical aspect and interfacing with IBM. So I'm just going to read a quick excerpt. It's from page 16. Using the punch card technology invented by US Census Bureau employee Herman Hollerith in the 1880s, IBM enabled the Nazis to automate and accelerate all 6 phases of the 12-year Holocaust: identification, exclusion, confiscation, ghettoization, deportation, and extermination. And it kind of goes on to the extent that for the exact numbers of ghetto Jews to be deported to the concentration camps, Hollerith codes were assigned to each of the major camps: Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau. In the case of Auschwitz, a 5-digit Hollerith number was tattooed into inmates' arms, at least until the mass killing ramped up. IBM machinery was used to manage the flow of millions of prisoners through the camps. Without it, mass extermination could not have been organized. I mean, there's the detail that you've gone into here is just absolutely incredible. But the fact that, you know, an organization, IBM, and by the way, one of the things that I learned when I started training in NLP was that IBM were one of the first corporations to bring in NLP trainers to train their staff on neurolinguistic programming. So, and one of the first trainer that I ever met was an ex-IBM employee.
Wow.
How
about that?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this that's important to understand, and the point that I'm trying to make throughout the book, is that these events they're not just isolated to the Nazi past. You know, this stuff didn't go away. It's all still with us, and there's a bigger principle at stake here behind just IBM's systematization of the Holocaust. And that's what the former emeritus professor Kees van der Pijl has called the information liquidation model. And he talks, for example, about Operation Phoenix in Vietnam in 1968, where information was used to identify key communist leaders and to exterminate them. And so what you find then, when you fast forward to the War on Terror, again, it's a similar kind of idea. Consider social media and the kind of networks. You've seen these spider diagrams of key influencers, you know, big influencers are big nodes and they link to lots of smaller nodes and so on. And that kind of logic was used in the War on Terror to, you know, identify kind of major terrorists and terrorist cells and, you know, their connections and so on, and then go and take them out. And so what you have to ask is that when you have the same companies with us today, you know, like IBM, Oracle, Sun Microsystems, you know, all of the big social media giants, all of the big tech, and they are creating this system where everybody is monitored and surveilled, you know, down to quite a granular level. You know, they have all of the details about most people's lives because people have consented to feeding it all into Facebook and X and YouTube and other platforms. They have all of the psychographic profiles. It becomes increasingly easy from that point to target the key dissidents and, if necessary, take them out. So essentially that whole kind of war on terror apparatus established under the phony pretext of a war on terror has now put in place the infrastructure where in future it would become quite easy to exterminate dissidents. Douglas Valentine talks about this in his book on the CIA.
Yeah.
So it's pretty evil what they have done here, and you know, this was all supposedly to protect the public and keep us safe, you know, just as with COVID. But what you actually have now in place is the architecture for a totalitarian control system. You know, when it reaches that moment, when they go for it, you know, to really come down hard on this, a lot of this stuff will be in place. And so, yeah, you can trace it all the way back to IBM and its involvement with the Nazis, but it runs much deeper.
Yeah. And also, let's not forget Peter Thiel and Palantir.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big one, isn't it? I mean, that's, you know, that is the big one that's harvesting and hoovering up and analyzing, you know, billions and billions of terabytes of data imagine the power that comes with that. It's absolutely extraordinary. And of course, Trump essentially gave Palantir the keys to the kingdom at the start of his second term, and Palantir in the UK, has access to the NHS data, etc. It's a frightening prospect. What they call the agentic state, essentially an attempt to power governments with AI. It pushes in the direction of turning political decision making away from human beings and away from anything that's lawful necessarily, simply to an algorithmic dictatorship. In what the algorithms say will determine how things are. That is the direction of travel that they are deliberately trying to build. That is the kind of system that would allow a numerically minuscule proportion of the world's population, the most powerful 1% or whatever, that's really running the show, to be able to control everyone else. That's what they're trying to build. That is the prison, the digital gulag that they're trying to create, and it's absolutely essential that people see that.
The panopticon.
I mean, that could easily be a segue into talking about kind of transhumanism, but perhaps before we do that, I'd like to ask you another question that again might be quite difficult to speak about. But do you ever have any sort of concerns about your own safety? I mean, we've all read stories about, really kind of influential movers and shakers in different spheres being kind of taken out. And being someone myself who's quite sort of prominent in like what I do here, that thought has kind of crossed my mind. We've been sort of monitored by the secret services here in what we've been doing. There's no doubt about it. And I just kind of wonder whether those are things that you kind of think about.
Yes, indeed. Yes and no, I guess.
Yeah.
So in 2020, I took out a massive life insurance policy on my own life, just in case, just in case, so that my family would be well provided for, should anything like that happen. On the other hand, I mean, I'm small fry, and when you look at the information warfare, the Camp 2 influencers, like Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, and so on, they're reaching vast audiences of millions. That's where the power lies in the alternative media landscape.
Yeah.
Someone like me, what do I reach? Tens of thousands max. I'm not big enough to really pose a threat. I'm not on social media. I don't, sign up to these people who keep emailing me about search engine optimization and, hey, help people find your content better and all of that. I don't have the time to be doing all of that stuff or the inclination.
Yeah.
I just put the content out there. So I don't really feel as though I'm big enough to be a serious threat in that respect. And again, I think there's lots of people like that out there. And so long as you can essentially digitally kettle us, and leave people kind of shouting into an echo chamber on X or whatever, it's not a serious threat. But there's only so much I can do. My role is researching and getting to the truth and trying to put it out there in a way that people can understand. I can't do much more than that, and I can't worry about much more than that. But yeah, you do think about these things. And this year, now that I've started to kind of call out the structure, if you like, of the Camp 2 network, I've been under attack from multiple Camp 2 sources this year. So you feel the flak kind of starting to mount at that point. Does that bother me? Not really, because it just means that I'm right. I'm over the target.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, yes, it's a risky game. It's a precarious game. You never know what's going to happen from day to day.
Well, one example is Jill Dando, clearly, because she had the opportunity to share the truth outside of the echo chamber. So clearly, that's something that they were really worried about, because she had an enormous mainstream audience.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you'll never get these messages in the mainstream, and you'll only at best get them in twisted and distorted form
Mhm.
in the mainstream alternative media.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Well, I would like to say, call out Housie here because he's a prolific writer for local newspapers, and
Mm.
he must have, I don't know, monthly articles in there at least.
What you're talking about, the
Yeah,
light
and the
paper and yeah, yeah, the
Straudio's
local
Journal,
paper and
Western Daily Press.
newspapers. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So-
I've been a sort of congenital writer of letters to newspapers for about 45 years,
Wow,
and
good for you.
I just enjoy doing it, and they just come out of me really quickly, so I can write a letter to the press in 5 or 10 minutes. So
That's good.
most of them finish up in print as well.
Yeah.
So
Good, good.
yeah. Um, I suppose I'm kind of now realizing after having heard what you've just said, David, that I think I really raised that question because I think I see you as perhaps one of the few people from within the academic world who is like sort of doing the labours, doing the
Mm.
intellectual labour that you're doing so well, and you are doing it superbly, and that's going to be noticed. That's
Mm.
going to be noticed. And I'm
Yeah,
not, I'm not saying this because I want you to be, there sort of carrying in the corner. From my experience of you, you're the last person to be doing that. But I just think perhaps it's important to be realistic about this world that we're in,
yeah.
and the forces that we're actually up against. Yeah,
That's right. And it comes back to my earlier point about we need to do what is right because it is right.
exactly.
And we need to act in ways that align with our values because life is short and we don't have much time and we have to make each day count. And so for me, kind of carrying on in academia, an environment which is just burying its head in the sand regarding these key issues, that wasn't acceptable. And I had a strong sense of what is the point in knowing all of this information and having all of this training if I'm just going to stay quiet and do nothing. I couldn't have lived with myself. It's a matter of conscience as
Mhm.
much as anything else, and none of us know how much time we've got anyway. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just kind of following my conscience and doing what I
Yeah,
can.
Yeah.
absolutely. How are you doing on notes there, Housie?
I, I could go on for hours.
You
Yeah,
could.
there's also a question about creating our own parallel kind of institutions. I don't like the word institution, but
Mm,
I'm thinking of Gloria Moss, who's created Truth University,
mm,
which you might kind of well be aware of, and she's doing really important work in trying to create a kind of higher educational system that's kind of outside the mainstream, which values critical thinking, like in the way that people like us from the academic world do. So I just wonder whether you might be interested in like getting involved in something like that, in setting up some sort of parallel systems whereby young people who are maybe coming out of the sort of home education world or coming out of the sort of Steiner education world would welcome the opportunity to engage with kind of higher educational learning, but in a way that's not within that kind of captured system.
That is an interesting question. Um, yes, in principle, uh, obviously, I would welcome such a thing. Um, my role has always been as an educator. I was good at it. I enjoyed it, and that is, I'm comfortable in that environment, and that's where my training and my skills are. So yes, would a worthy kind of alternative academic institution of some kind come along, that would be a great thing. However, my suspicions are, well, first of all, such institutions are not really emerging. And the key one that is in Belgium, I think it is, where they've bought a chateau and they have a few dozen students. I forget the name of it. You can find it easily enough online. Set up by Paul Freiters, I think. I have some serious doubts and reservations about that, which I won't go into now. But it kind of fits into my kind of Camp 2 framework in a sense, and it's almost as though, as with the alternative media, the powers that be managed to get ahead of it and create this kind of Camp 2 space to kind of contain dissent. My suspicion is that a similar thing might be starting to happen now with so-called independent or alternative academia, to the extent that it even exists, that it's already being kind of gotten ahead of and captured. I hope I'm wrong,
Right.
but I'm not seeing any good signs there at the moment.
Right. I just thought of a great name for this Camp 3 University. We call it Camp 3 University. Yeah, we'd all people like you and I would be kind of queuing up to be involved in that.
Well, I mean, the problem, of course, is it costs vast amounts of money to set up a
Yeah,
university.
yes.
And among other things, you need access to a proper library, which this place in Belgium doesn't have. Where do you get that kind of money? Well, as soon as you do get that kind of money, it's highly likely that the funding sources will want something in exchange, which will promote elite power. I had a conversation with Jeffrey Tucker one time, and he was mooting the possibility of setting up a brownstone university. And I wondered how on earth that might possibly come about and where all the money might come from. Of course, it hasn't actually materialized. But yeah, we're seeing a real problem now because there is a genuine need in society for a university that is able to tackle these taboo subjects in an open and honest way. And we're not seeing it. And I often reflect with respect to 9/11, what would have happened had academia just relentlessly gone after the truth regarding the events of 9/11?
Yeah.
That whole war on terror narrative would have unraveled very, very quickly. We'd be living in a very, very different world now. But that's not what happened. And I'm still not really seeing any academic institutions that are capable of doing that. It's a major problem. But yeah, I mean, were such a thing to be established, I'd love to be a part of it.
Yeah. Of course, there used to be the University of East London, which had this wonderful kind of program where you could actually write your own degree. You could, and I don't think it exists now, but back in the noughties and back in the 90s, it was a fantastic way for people who had a particular interest in something to then you go along and start a degree, write their own degree, find their own teachers, do the research that's the kind of thing that would be great to have now. It really would.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these models have fallen by the wayside. The kind of education for the oppressed model going, back to 1970. They've just been completely marginalised and relegated by essentially what is now a neoliberal academy that is run by a bloated bureaucracy and staffed by bureaucrats who make poor decisions and have no real understanding of the nature of academic pursuits, or who were academics previously, but are willing to kind of put all of those principles aside for a little bit of extra salary.
Yeah. I think this is a great conversation that we've had here, and hopefully it'll be listened to by lots of people. And who knows, there might be people out there. Who knows, there might be a really rich millionaire out there who's sort of very much in our ball camp.
That's the dream, isn't it? Although you need a multi-millionaire to set up a university.
Well,
Who wants to contribute unconditionally?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. And maybe I'm just naive, or I'm, optimistic. I'm a Sagittarian. I'm an optimist, but I like to think there are some really rich people out there who are in our camp, and if the right kind of offer or kind of opportunity came along, might want to invest in. I don't want to use the word invest, actually. Might want
Mm,
to put their resources into something that was really going to do kind of good in the world. I'm sure there are
yeah.
people there like that.
I'd like to think so, and it circles right back to the beginning of this conversation when I talked about the anonymous donor who stumped up £13,000 to make my book open
Yeah,
access.
yeah,
There are people out there like this, so yeah, I'd be very keen to be part of such an initiative, but it would require a very significant amount of funding.
Mm.
yeah. Well, let's hope someone like that is listening to this and
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
plans.
Yeah.
I've got more things I could talk about.
I think we may need a part two. What do you
Yeah,
think?
yeah. Well, we probably about an hour and a half now, this conversation.
Mm.
So can we do a part two?
Sure,
What do you think? Yeah,
Yeah.
why not?
we do that.
Okay. Well, just before we end,
Yeah,
just a more positive little story. At the start of COVID, I'm also a musician. So at the start of COVID, I wrote my first Jibby Jab song, and I went down to my local open mic at the local pub and sang my Jibby Jab song. And
That's brave.
it was extremely brave. But what I got was rolling eyes like this and a very kind of meager applause. But nobody would dare come up to me and have that conversation.
Yeah.
Nobody would dare to do that. So, but luckily, I live in a wonderful community, and regardless of who the people are or what their perception of what's going on is, they're all really kind-hearted people. So I think I'm seen as the neighborhood terrorist in some way, but yeah, with a grin to that.
badge of honor.
Yeah. But more recently, I think maybe about 2 months ago, Siroj, a friend of mine, really good guitarist, visited me, stayed over, and he said, "Let's write a song." So I said, "Okay." So he came up with a few chords, and I started coming up with some lyrics. We got to fight for our freedom, and then calling out the establishment and the technocracy and everything in there. And I said, "Well, great song. Let's do it at open mic tonight." So we went down to the open mic, and it was his birthday too, and we sang this song, and they absolutely loved it. They went wild, and they asked for more. I thought, okay, the climate is changing.
Shifts happened.
The shift is happening. They know.
Yeah.
Still don't want to talk about it too much, but it's in their minds clearly.
I
So
love tales like that because you
yeah,
hear kind of so much demoralization and defeatism.
Mm.
There's too many people asleep, etc.
yeah,
No, no, no. The consciousness is rising. More and more
it is.
people are waking up. It's a good sign.
It is a good sign. It is a good sign. Well, so just before we go, David, uh, I just want to remind people this is a history book.
Yes, it is. Yes, very much so.
It's a superb history book that everyone has to read.
Yeah, it's tremendous. And what's the best people to get hold of you? I know that you have your own website. Could you
Yep.
just tell that to the listeners so they know how to find you?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is davidahughes.net. There is a raft of support options available on davidahughes.net/support. Feel free to take out a free or paid subscription, or to donate via bank transfer or other means if you value the work that I'm doing. I don't have an academic career anymore. I don't have a salary anymore. I don't have job security anymore. I'm entirely reliant on public support. The COVID book, as you say, I don't receive any direct income from, no royalties. The Wall Street book, I get a small amount. They send me about £200 or £300 or something every 6 months, which again is peanuts. So to keep the lights on, I would very much appreciate any support that anybody is able to offer.
And I just want to say to our listeners, David is clearly a warrior, and we should be supporting our warriors as much as we can.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. The way I would put it is, David, you're one of the great heroes, and
I don't know about that.
that's why I put it.
I'm just doing my small part. There are many of us doing this.
You're as far as I'm concerned, you're doing heroic work. I want to tell a little story. The first time that I learned about your work was from a friend of mine who sent me an email about a year and a half ago. Incredibly excited email. Have you heard of David A Hughes? This guy's amazing. He's just made his book free and you can download it. And he was absolutely blown away, by your work. And this is a really intelligent, really kind of, smart, turned on guy. And he just discovered your work and he was blown away by it. So that really says something, that your work is incredibly important. So
well, that's lovely to hear. And
Yeah.
it's like what I was saying before. I've got no idea how it's resonating out there. So I love hearing little anecdotes like that. Wonderful.
That's great.
Mm.
Well, we'd love to have you on again if you'd like to come on again.
Sure thing. Yep.
Yeah,
Let's do it again. Yeah, we'll do
Thanks,
that.
David.
Thank you very much for your time.
And thank
Yeah.
you for your
Appreciate
time.
it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, guys.
And so we're going to say goodbye from
Housie.
and goodbye from Skyman and goodbye from
David A. Hughes.
David.
yeah.
We'll speak again soon, David.
Yep.
Take
All right.
care.
See you
All
then.
the
Yep.
best.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.